Federation of Labor. She brings working people into politics and policy, advocates for fair trade, supports a renewable jobs economy, and works to build a vibrant, diverse labor movement. We really appreciate having you here tonight, Harriet. Thank you so much. And so, without further ado, we'd like to have David start first and speak about the jobs aspect of the Green New Deal.
Okay, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the folks here for organizing this great series about climate change and the Green New Deal. This is an important public service to get this information out. So, hope you all are good tonight. There's a lot going on, obviously, between the elections today, the coronavirus and everything else. We're all kind of on edge, I think, waiting to see what's going to happen with all this. So it's great that you are here tonight to talk about what I think is actually the most important thing, and that's the climate crisis, the most serious issue facing us as a society. So thank you very much for coming out to hear about this. So I'm going to kind of frame some issues about climate change and the Green New Deal, and then hand it over to Harriet, who will talk more specifically about how jobs could be created by the Green New Deal right here in Northeast Ohio. So I'll start out just with some few things about climate change and why we have something called a Green New Deal. So the trends we face are truly ominous and truly clear, sort of undisputable about what's happening. The Earth is warming. We know that very well. And it's mainly warming because we've put another insulating blanket of greenhouse gases around our planet. The main of these gases is carbon dioxide, which comes when we burn fossil fuels. Whenever we burn coal or oil or natural gas, carbon dioxide is a byproduct. It's emitted into the atmosphere. And just in the past 100 years or so, we've dramatically changed the composition of our planet's atmosphere. It's gone up like 41%, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is pretty amazing what little human beings on this enormous planet have been able to do with our global economy. So by doing that, we've raised the Earth's temperature by about 1 degree centigrade. That's almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that added heat is disrupting our climate in many ways. And, you know, we had a very stable, benign climate for thousands of years that allowed our civilization to develop. And now that very stable climate is being disrupted. So we're seeing all kinds of new extremes of weather. There's severe storms, there's melting ice and sea level rise, floods, droughts, fires, species extinctions, famine, and conflict around the world already, even though climate change is just starting to occur. You may have seen the pictures from Australia in recent months, just really apocalyptic kinds of fires affecting that society. And that's what we're in store for as climate change proceeds. Now, science is telling us that if we're going to avert the worst of these kinds of conditions, we really need to kind of cap the warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade, okay? That's about 3.5 degrees or so Fahrenheit. So we have this 1.5 degree warming cap. We've already warmed over 1 degree centigrade, so there's not a lot of room left for us to keep warming. So to reach that, to maintain it on the stable conditions, it means that we have to reduce our greenhouse gases, again, mostly carbon dioxide, by about 45% in the next 10 years, so by the year 2030. And then we have to get to sort of net zero emissions by the year 2050. So that's not going to be hard to do. You imagine we have to reduce carbon emissions a lot in a very, very short time. And that's going to require really far-reaching changes in many sectors of our economy, in our buildings, in our transportation sector, and especially in energy, how we produce energy. We've got to get to carbon-neutral ways of doing things very, very rapidly. Now, the good thing is that it's technically possible to do that. We really know the pathways that will get us there. And I've read some recent studies that say that it's actually not that costly. That 2% or so of GDP spent continuously for over the next several decades could get us there. We could really transition our economy and our energy system because we're already spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year on our energy system already. If we just redirect that to clean energy and spend a little more on research and infrastructure and the other things, we can get there. So that's a kind of a good story. The only thing standing in our way really is political will and the power of the fossil fuel industry, who has perverted our political system and bought off half the politicians in Washington. So so that's really where the issue that we're facing. It's technically possible to do this, but the politics are standing in our way. So we're talking about big transitions in our economy, and there have been many proposals in recent months on how we can do this. Many focus on things like a carbon fee or a carbon tax, which would make fossil fuels relatively more expensive than other fuels or other forms of energy. And while this would be a good thing to do, to have such a fee, and many economists recommend it, I think it's debatable whether just a fee like that could get us to where we need to be, net zero emissions by 2050. Whether a market-based approach like that could really do it fast enough. And that's why many people and supporters of a Green New Deal think that we need a broader approach, one that includes government regulation, so real targets and deadlines for how fast we convert our energy system, and major investment by the government. So more research in clean energy, and investments in infrastructure like our transportation system, better transit in our cities, a smart grid. There are a lot of things our government could be investing in to accelerate the transition that we need. So many of us are thinking that we need not only some market-based approaches, but a big government investment, as well as new kinds of government incentives and regulation. And these kinds of big government programs have been done before in our country. During the Depression, we had the New Deal, which ramped up government efforts to help people, to help the economy get started again and give people jobs. So the thinking is that we can do this again, and so that's where a new Green Deal idea comes from. And the other thing about, before I get into some of the specifics about a Green New Deal, is that it deals not just with changing our energy system and reducing carbon emissions, but also making our economy fairer and more just and equitable for more people. A lot of people believe that these two things are related: the economic crisis of inequality that we have in this economy and the climate crisis. And you really can't solve one without the other. So you need to tackle them both together. So that's where the Green New Deal comes in. And it's really the only proposal I've seen that is big enough to address the scale of the climate crisis and the problems that we face. And it's about restructuring our energy economy and also our regular economy to make it fairer for more people. So really, that's tonight's topic, is economic transformation and how a Green New Deal could do this. And a Green New Deal really is about creating good new jobs, reducing economic inequality, and empowering workers in ways that they haven't been in recent decades. So I want to take just a minute and just kind of go through some of the goals of the Green New Deal as it's been proposed in Congress. And these are from House Resolution 109, which is the resolution that was issued and brought into Congress about a year ago. It was last February of last year. And these are just some of the goals to give you a sense of some of the language about how the Green New Deal works for a just economy. So, achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transition for all communities and workers, create millions of good, high-wage jobs, and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people of the United States, invest in the infrastructure and industry of the United States to sustainably meet the challenges of the 21st century, provide resources, training, and high-quality education, including higher education to all people, ensure that the Green New Deal mobilization creates high-quality union jobs that pay prevailing wages, hire local workers, offers training and advancement opportunities, and guarantees wage and benefit parity for workers affected by the transition. And I know Harriet will be talking about some of those ideas. A lot of this kind of turns on how we can achieve a just transition for all workers, because there are a lot of workers in fossil fuel sectors of the economy, and a lot of those jobs will be phased out in the transition that we need. Another goal is to guarantee a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people. Strengthen and protect the right of all workers to organize, unionize, collectively bargain, free of coercion, intimidation, and harassment. Strengthen and enforce labor, workplace health and safety, anti-discrimination, and wage and hour standards across all employers, industries, and sectors. And finally, enact and enforce trade rules, procurement standards, and border adjustments with strong labor and environmental protections to stop the transfer of jobs and pollution overseas and to grow domestic manufacturing in the United States. And that last one is something that politicians like Sherrod Brown are very concerned about. They don't want to enact environmental regulations here that will only cause jobs to be offshored to China or some other country that does not have as strict environmental regulations. So you need these border adjustments to make sure that there's a fair, even playing field for our industry. So those are just some of this is specific language that you'll find in House Resolution 109 for the Green New Deal. Just to give you a flavor for the kinds of economic provisions that are in there. So the bottom line is that we have to build our way out of climate change. We need to build a lot of new things, more efficient buildings, a better transportation system, better energy system. And it's going to take a lot of workers and jobs to do that. And the Green New Deal today is just a proposal for getting us there. It's a very general resolution in Congress, has a lot of co-sponsors, including Marcia Fudge here in Northeast Ohio. But a lot of the details still await to be worked out. It's going to take a lot of study, a lot of work by all kinds of people and organizations around the country over the next several years to flesh out this proposal into real legislation that can get passed. And it's also going to take a political change on a big scale here in this country. To get any of this done, of course, we have to win the presidency, the Democrats do, as well as the House and the Senate, before any progressive legislation like this is going to be passed. So in some ways, our biggest job right now is to be involved in politics for the next few months and leading up to the November elections, and to make sure we elect good people into office so we can get them to start working on some of these proposals. So that just gives you a flavor for some of the things the Green New Deal calls for in economic terms. So I'll just turn over to Harriet now to talk more specifically about maybe how this might relate to labor unions in Northeast Ohio.
Thanks, David. That was a great introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the labor movement and where it stands with regard to the Green New Deal, and also then spend some time talking about what a just transition would look like. So in terms of, you'd think from what that list that David read that all the unions would be jumping up and down and pushing for the Green New Deal, but that is not the case. About 80% of unions have no position on the Green New Deal at all. And of the remaining 20, there's only a handful that have actually come out and supported it. Others have said good things about it, and then there are others who oppose it. So it's interesting now, and several of the unions who support it are quite small. There's a couple of big ones. The biggest union that has endorsed the Green New Deal is is SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, which is the second largest union in the country. So that's pretty big. The American Association of Flight Attendants, which is part of the Communications Workers, which is my union, has also come out and supported it. And that's important because there's a very dynamic female president of that union who is in the running for the next president of the AFL-CIO. And if she were to win that, it would really, things would change dramatically within the labor movement. It's a big if, but her name is Sarah Nelson, and she may, she's in contention to succeed the current president, who's Richard Trumka. He's from the mine workers, interestingly. So that's important. The Steelworkers Union has been very, very active on, they were really, I think, the driving force along with the Sierra Club of what they call the Blue-Green Alliance, which goes back several years. And they've been worked very hard to try to bring labor and environmental groups, people together. With a lot of success. There have been some hiccups in that. A bunch of unions left over pipeline issues and that sort of thing. But the Steelworkers, which is a pretty large union, has been very active around bringing environmentalists and labor together. They're not exactly supporting the Green New Deal, but they're open. And so the Blue-Green Alliance actually has come up with a proposal that is similar to the Green New Deal and actually, I think, puts them in a position to potentially endorse it in the future. So that's a good thing. And then finally, there's another group called the Labor Network for Sustainability, and it includes a lot of high-powered people who have retired either from the AFL-CIO or the UAW or other unions, and who are working kind of night and day for the Green New Deal. And they very strongly support the Green New Deal and unabashedly support the Green New Deal and are trying to trying to cull everybody in the labor movement who actively supports the Green New Deal to bring them together. And actually, I went to what they call a convergence last June on that very subject. So those are the two organizations within the labor movement that are really working hard to move us in the direction of a Green New Deal. And I want to get into some of the issues that we face. But before I do that, I thought I would circulate, maybe if you could pass these around. This is really my aspirational list of what a Green New Deal could look like in Cuyahoga County, because I think, and when you look at this document, you'll see that it is very much targeted. It targets unions, and I'll explain. There's a lot of acronyms in here, but I did this in order to try to paint a picture of what it could look like, because one of the problems with the Green New Deal, and it especially impacts union workers, is that it's aspirational. It isn't, like David, it's not fleshed out, so it's a lot of commitments and promises, but people who, work hard every day and are proud of their skills and work with their hands and don't spend their lives thinking about things are very pragmatic. They want to know, where's the beef? What are the specifics? There aren't specifics, and so they can say, well, that's pie in the sky, and that's what a lot of them have said. So I tried to put together this document that's very specific to our area. And I just want to go over a few things. Like, for instance, we could have new green enterprises. The first one that comes to mind, obviously, is the Icebreaker Project. And the fate of that project, just to tell you, I don't want to be too partisan here, but David mentioned it, the fate of that entire project, which is over a dozen years of work and millions of dollars and the efforts of dozens and dozens of people, lies in the hands of one man, Sam Randazzo. He's not only the head of the Ohio Power Siting Board, but he's also the head of the PUCO. He can completely deep six this project. He has spent his life as a lawyer working for the utilities and specifically against wind power. And this man, in the next month, is going to decide the fate of the Icebreaker Project. So if you want to do anything about that, write to the public utility, write to the governor. Write to the governor. The governor has said that he's, what is his expression? He's for everything. All of the above. That's what he says, all of the above. However, he appointed a man who couldn't be more opposed to wind power than anybody. I mean, he probably appointed the most anti-wind person in the state of Ohio to head the Public Utilities Commission. So the governor wants to have the look of being for all. So if you contact the governor, flood him with letters, that would be a good thing. And it would certainly, that icebreaker project would be a great boon to the Cleveland economy, a great boon, and it could set us off on a path in the future of tremendous prosperity and, again, good jobs. So the next one there, Blade and Nacelle Manufacturing Plant on Lake Erie, in that area between north of St. Clair and south of 90, between downtown and Martin Luther King. It's a sort of a underutilized industrial zone. Be a perfect place to be making those blades and exporting them all over the world. If we have the icebreaker project on the lake, it would be much easier to get a wind turbine manufacturing plant, on the lake as well, on land. If we don't have it, the enthusiasm for making blades here might be a little bit diminished. But that's another project that would really be cool. Then in the area of waste recycling facilities, styrofoam recycling, electric train manufacturing, rail parts production facilities, and electric vehicle manufacturing. All these things we could have here if we had the political will and we had the leadership to bring them here, neither of which exist right now, but both of which are necessary for us going into the future. And then, for instance, organizing existing facilities. MRF is a municipal recycling facility. That's what a MRF is, right? And there are a few of them around here where the trash haulers take the recycling to these facilities and they get sorted. And as you all know, I hope you all know that since China and Southeast Asia stopped taking our plastics, basically recycling has collapsed. So there needs to be, again, political will to really make sure that stuff is recycled and recycled properly and that we handle it here locally. So and I'm trying to convince the Laborers International Union and the Teamsters International Union, both of whom deal with waste and both of whom work for cities, that the union itself should get into the business of waste recycling and waste handling and plastics reduction and all this other stuff, because as we all know, cities have no money. And these facilities are big, but you know who has money? International unions have money, and they could invest in this sort of thing. It's not something they do right now, but there's no reason that they couldn't do it. And I think in a couple, here and there around the country, I think in Seattle, the Teamsters has a recovery facility, and so there's all kinds of potential here. Transportation, ATU is Amalgamated Transit Union. Expanding mass transit options, UAW actively involved in electric car production, conversion of auto parts production to rail parts production, huge expansion of public transit. In construction, massive infrastructure projects, windmills on the lake, retrofitting all government and all public buildings, solar panels and on all government and public buildings. And you've got hospitals, you've got universities. Exponential expansion of retrofitting and solar panels on all buildings, construction of manufacturing facilities for rail, wind, and solar, installation of geothermal systems, and finally, installation of green heating and cooling systems in public and private buildings. So that's what you could do in construction. And by the way, the Icebreaker project is well named because if this goes, if this anti-wind czar lets it happen in 1 month's time, if that goes forward, first of all, the pilot is 5 or 6 turbines. There could be hundreds of turbines out on Lake Erie, and it could be a booming business for all of Ohio, but in particular Northeast Ohio. And it would be the first it would be the first in fresh water. There's a lot of, as you know, there's on the coast, the East Coast, and certainly on the coast of Europe and Ireland and all over Europe, they've got a lot of wind turbines on the ocean. That is salt water that doesn't freeze. So our project here would be the first in fresh water, which does freeze. And so that is sort of It'll be a pilot in many ways, but it also means lots of jobs for people who fix things. Because, you know, with ice on, of course, with global warming, we may no longer have ice on Lake Erie. That's another issue. But that's why they've named it Icebreaker, because it would be trailblazing in that sense, and that makes it even more exciting. And also, you know, there's a lot of people who know how to do things here. This is a how-to community. And we would have a great workforce to address a lot of those issues. So then finally, in the field of energy, now the promotion of Cleveland Public Power as a vehicle for wind energy, the diminution of First Energy. And I don't know how many people know two things about First Energy: how evil they are and how powerful they are. They have 100 lobbyists in Columbus, and you can make a very strong argument, in fact, that they are running the state of Ohio. They have a lot of politicians that will do whatever they want, Republicans and Democrats. The Speaker of the House has gotten millions, and his team have gotten millions and millions of dollars. I'm not kidding, millions of dollars just for House Bill 6 alone, but going back many years as well. First Energy has got a lot of black activists on the payroll from the clergy. You know, they're all over the place. And again, they have 100 lobbyists in Columbus alone. That's where your money's going, by the way. They can't run a good company, but they sure can lobby. So, and they are the most anti-environmental utility in the entire nation. So you've got in the state of New York, the utilities hooked up with the wind industry, and they, unlike House Bill 6, it was wind and nukes versus coal. Here it's nukes and coal versus wind and solar. But so there, you know, other utilities and they don't have to be this bad. But First Energy is the worst of the worst. So it's important the diminution of First Energy's power, their reach and their influence is really important. Another thing is to get unions involved in energy efficiency work and to aggressively promote the struggling wind and solar industries in Ohio. We're as far away from that as we possibly could be at this point. There's geothermal. That's, again, another important source of energy. And then, again, those are various unions connecting with solar installations. In terms of education, you know, the teachers union, the American Federation of Teachers, there's two big teachers unions, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers. The AFT, its members are mostly in the cities, and the National Education Association's members are mostly in the suburbs and in the rural areas. That's pretty much sort of kind of a quick distinction between them. And only in a few cases has the National Education Association involved itself in curriculum. But teachers' unions ought to be aggressive and say, we want, we want more environmental curriculum in our science classes and our, all over. My son or my grandson goes to school in Vermont, which is a little different, as we know. And he had a whole curriculum around climate change. And, the math teacher and the civic, I don't know if they don't call it humanities. I'm not sure what they call history or social studies. They don't call it that anymore. But every one of his teachers, this was in middle school, did a different piece of climate change. And it was really kind of neat. But the unions could really push for involvement in curriculum and curriculum development. And I think they should. We could have the unions, again, could push for field trips. Again, take less time testing and more time, taking kids out to see the world. They could do field trips for elementary and middle school children to environmental facilities. And then making a really intentional connection in all science courses to climate change. And also insist on the teaching of what David said, telling people about the urgency, the climate emergency and the urgency of action around addressing climate change. So those are aspirational things that could be done in many places, but in particular, I was thinking of Northeast Ohio. So that's that. But I want to kind of return to some of the issues that the unions face. And one of the problems is, first of all, in the fossil fuel industry is probably the most heavily unionized industry in the entire country. almost everybody, you think of those oil rigs in Texas, but you think of all the utilities, they're all union members. And guess what? They make a lot of money. If you work for First Energy, for instance, first of all, they don't hire enough people. So they want people, they're more than happy to have people work 12 10-hour days. They'd rather have you work on the weekend. If you don't work those on the weekend, you can still work your 5 12-hour days. Well, that does a couple things. First of all that overtime gets paid at time and a half. These guys, 22, 23 linemen, 22, 23 years old, are making over $100,000 a year, well over with overtime. And what does overtime do to people? It rots the brain, right? You're like a rat on a wheel. But these rats on these wheels are rich rats because they think they're rich, because it's a lot more than their daddies and moms made. But so they have this no time to think, no time to live. You work your life away, but you make a lot of money. And you're young, and you're strong, and you're highly skilled, because these are highly skilled jobs. And guess what? You all vote for Trump because you don't have time. You don't have time to think, reflect, none of that. And you're liking it. You're making all this money. You're really proud of your work because you're quite highly skilled. You do challenging, dangerous work, climb up all those poles. You work all hours of the day. You're making, you work and you're making tons of money because of all that overtime. And the company refuses to hire enough full-time workers to do the job. They just rely on continuous and continual overtime. So these guys, they don't think, they can't think, they got no time to think. They're making all this money, and they're really proud of their work. So there is no way this group of people is going to be on the front lines of ending the fossil fuel industry. No way. So my attitude toward this group of people is they need education, but it's not going to come from within. It's not going to come. The companies spend a lot of time, with going after, especially First Energy, in particular First Energy. So they aren't. There's nothing about their work and their lives that is ever going to lead to coming around to seeing the importance and the necessity of keeping those fossil fuels in the ground. That's not going to happen. But education is really the only thing that's going to work, and it's not the kind of education that we think of education. I think they're going to have to be surrounded and overwhelmed and overcome by the existential crisis that is climate change. In other words, forces around them, outside of their bosses, their company, outside of their work life. So that's not a group I would look to for any kind of leadership on this, for all these very good material reasons. However, you've got other sectors in the labor market. You've got another sector which is traditionally conservative, but who understands very well that the future is coming, and they understand, I think, to a great extent, the inevitability of these huge dramatic changes that are going to have to come about, and that's the building trades. One thing about the building trades is the unions train people. If you work for a company, ArcelorMittal, I see my good friend in the back, you get training on the job, but if you are in a trade, you get like between 4 and 6 years of training. It's called joint labor management training, but it's always a union guy who trains you. So the building trades people understand very well that, the power of unions, and they're very, very strong advocates for their unions and of their unions. And they understand, and because they learned it in apprenticeship school, they can, the stuff that they do can be done just as easily in green construction as it can be in, old style construction. So they're open, and they understand that, retrofitting buildings and working on the grid and infrastructure, all the infrastructure that's needed for a green economy, and they're the ones that can build this. Like the wind turbine, the turbines on the lake, nobody else has the skills. It's all going to be union on the lake because they have all this, they have 5 and 6 years of training to do their work. And you can't put people who don't know what they're doing out on the lake to build these wind turbines. It's nobody's going to let that happen. So they understand, the building trades do understand that, however, they've been compromised because they also work for the utilities. And you had this bizarre situation, again, with House Bill 6, where the electricians union, the electricians would stand to gain a ton of jobs from wind power. And yet you had them, teaming up with First Energy and the Speaker of the House to make sure that the Advanced Energy Standard was trashed in House Bill 6, and that coal was bailed out, and that nukes were bailed out. There's a few jobs at the coal and nuke plants for them, but way more jobs in alternative energy, in wind and solar. But they got that company, propaganda. And so it's not, I think it's a good lesson. We all know this lesson because we all know that an enormous proportion of the electorate is willing to vote against their own self-interest, against their own economic self-interest for a complete lunatic, right? I'm sorry, but I got to speak the truth here. So don't just because I say that union people aren't necessarily going to identify their economic self-interest. The American people can't identify their economic or their social or political self-interest. So it's not specific to union people, but we have devised in the labor movement, I don't want to plug this, but a program called Common Sense Economics, where we actually teach people how to analyze their economic self-interest. You've got statistics that tell us right now that people who aren't doing well and who aren't doing any better than they were doing 4 years ago still say they like Trump because the economy is great. The economy is great for Wall Street, but it's not great for the person who's telling you that the economy is great. So we got a lot of disconnects that we have to address. And again, education literally educating people about how to figure out their own self-interest is really necessary today. And so it's necessary within the labor movement as well. So those are some of the obstacles. But we've got the other obstacle, which isn't an obstacle in a way, because I think David said it right. We really have to focus on the political situation right now, because we can't. None of these things are going to be possible unless we elect any of the Democrats. Any functioning adult, as the yard sign says. I don't know if you've seen that yard sign. There's a yard sign that says "Any functioning adult 2020." It's really, I can't, it's hard for me even to focus on the Green New Deal. I'm so freaked out about the political situation and who can beat Trump, but it's really important now. And I think, with the Green New Deal, I think the really good news is that with the Green New Deal, you can paint a picture. People like human stories, but they like stories. They like stories about people, but if we can paint a picture of what a Green New Deal would be and what it would mean and what kind of jobs and what kind of society it would create, maybe that would be helpful even in the political campaign at the moment, because it's so hard to know how to conduct ourselves in these really bizarre times. So I think there's a real important role that people who support the Green New Deal can play between now and November, which is to paint that picture of, another world is possible, and it won't happen unless we do the right thing politically and develop the political will to do so many of these things. And really, when you think, I tell people in the labor movement, don't think of it as the Green New Deal. Think of it as a New Deal, because people in the labor movement, as most Americans, I think, even hopefully still, understand that the New Deal was a lifesaver for our economy, for our people. It's ironic because the old New Deal saved capitalism, and now the capitalism, now we have all this talk about socialism. The New Deal saved capitalism. Herbert Hoover said, "Let the system go down with the ship." But Roosevelt, he was pretty progressive, but he saved a system that was actually falling completely apart. And I think, again, in the Green New Deal, we haven't fallen apart yet, but we will fall apart because of climate change if we don't make some dramatic changes in the way we not just in the way we handle the fossil fuel industry, but across the board. So I think there's hope. I think there's there's a huge need for education. I don't think people should assume anybody knows, and people especially don't understand the urgency that's associated with climate, with addressing climate change. And, we'll see how much it changes, our lifestyle, but, we can't continue with this profligate way of life that we have now. And it's not just about recycling and reducing, it's about transportation. It's about, oh, I need a Kleenex. I'm going to run down to the store and buy a box of Kleenex. We have to rethink the way we live. So anyway, I think there's hope, but there's a lot of work to do. And the unions, some of them are going to be in leadership roles, but some of them are going to follow. And I think it's really important for people to understand, that's very complicated, and there's a lot of competing forces here, and that. If we work together, if people of goodwill are very active around this issue and work hard and talk to other people, Margaret Mead is famous for saying, "It's don't worry that only a few people are." I can't remember the quote, but anyway, don't worry that only a few people are associated with the cause, or only that a few people want to change the world. Indeed, that's all there ever have been. So leadership is important, and leadership isn't just the first person, it's the second, third, and fourth. And once you have that, once you hold up that standard, other people, we can count on other people, and it's a series of concentric circles. So never bemoan the fact that there's too few of you in any given cause. If you do your work and you do it effectively, it grows by leaps and bounds. And that's my hope for what is going to happen in the next few months and in the coming years, in the next 5 to 10 years, because they're critical years. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Harriet, and David also. All right, we're going to open up the floor now for any questions that you might have. Does anybody have a question? Yes, Dorothy.
I think I have about 4 questions, but I want to say, first of all, I'm a part of the church's task force that puts this on. This is the best talk I've heard in this series, and I want to thank you for being here. I learned so much tonight. Fantastic. Okay, number 1, if a moderate wins, are we dead?
Since I spend most of my life in politics, I'll start, and then David, I'm sure, will have some enlightening things to say as well. No, I don't think we're dead. I think if a moderate wins, and I guess we all know who we're talking about, the moderate the people need to be in motion. There need to be, there needs to be a lot of push on a moderate. A moderate is going to tend to be, moderate is going to be kind of status quo. And I think there's been enough, you notice in the debates, the last debate, not one question about the environment, not one. And in all the other debates, not very much. The candidates brought it up more than the questioners. That's horrifying. It is horrifying how little attention is paid to climate change and the climate emergency. And so a moderate's going to need a lot of pushing. Obviously, if one of the other candidates, other 2 candidates, I guess, or 3 candidates, well, I don't know what we call Bloomberg. Bloomberg's probably better on the environment than Biden. I don't know, but I think he is, isn't he? So, a corporate environmentalist, I don't know. We'll see. But I think whomever wins needs a tremendous amount of pushing. Obviously, with Bernie and Elizabeth, they already have pretty developed programs. And Bloomberg, I guess, does sort of too. But if a moderate wins, they're going to need a lot of pushing. And the people, it's got to be up to the people. The news media is clueless. They remain clueless about environmental issues. So the people have got to be in motion. We're talking serious, we're in perilous times. You've got a very, very strong, virulent right wing. The good people of this country can't sit at home on their couches knitting and watching TV. They have to be in motion. You know, it's a staircase. Voting is the bottom stair of the staircase of citizenship. And people have got to start internalizing that. Get off social media, stop watching television, and get into the streets, seriously. The days ahead of us are perilous.
So, yeah, I would agree with all that. I think all the Democratic candidates have pretty good climate platforms, and they all agree that it's an existential crisis that has to be addressed as an emergency right away. And I actually think that any of them will have trouble doing this, given the power of the fossil fuel industry, that any candidate who wins and cares about climate change is going to need tremendous help of every citizen in the country to defeat that industry. It's the most powerful, wealthiest industry in the history of the world. So, and what we're telling it, what the science is telling it, is that most of their value as companies, you know, whether you're Exxon or you're Saudi Arabia, most of your value is in your proven reserves of fossil fuels, the oil in the ground. And we can't dig it up. It has to stay there. You have to write that off, trillions of dollars of wealth. So that's what the political struggle is about. And it's the biggest struggle in the history of politics. And we've got to win it.
I'm just going to hog it a little more, if I may. Where is the firefighters union?
I believe the firefighters have endorsed Biden already. Most of the unions have not endorsed anybody yet, but the firefighters have endorsed Biden. The sheet metal workers, I believe, have endorsed Biden, and the Amalgamated Transit Union has endorsed Biden. There's one other, the electricians union has endorsed Biden.
Thank you.
So,
We'll come back to Dorothy. Oh, here we go.
Hi. 2 years ago, I bought a hybrid car. I get 40 miles to gallon in the city, over 50 on the highway. Okay? My electricity comes from Inspire. Inspire has windmills, and I think in Toledo and Southern Ohio. So I don't know what this problem is with windmills. So I have all my electricity, wind, hybrid car. So BMW comes and kicks me in the teeth. I have to spend another $100 to get my plates because I have a hybrid car, because I'm not paying enough taxes. Okay? So you try to do the right thing and you get kicked in the teeth. Okay? Now, one more thing. Okay? We're talking about how we're going to re-employ all these people in the fossil fuel industry. Okay, let's say we do that. Nobody ever talks about the investors. People have billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in these companies. They're in pension plans. If you wipe out these companies, all of these pension plans lose hundreds of billions of dollars. How do you make them whole? Okay, that's one more thing. If climate change is an existential threat, why would somebody like former President Obama spend $15 million on an estate in Martha's Vineyard, 200 yards from the water, knowing that it's going to be underwater in 20 years? Doesn't make any sense. Something doesn't connect there. Either he doesn't believe it, or he thinks he's going to move within 20 years. That bothers me.
Yeah, if I can remember the 3 points. On the first one, I feel for you, because I also just redid my license plates, and I had to pay that $100 fee for a hybrid. And it's like someone was asleep while our General Assembly in Ohio, snuck that in to penalize, people who are trying to do the right thing. So it stinks. So yeah, it's something we need to start working on. On the investment issue in the fossil fuel industry, I think that the disinvestment in those companies is already starting to happen. Banks are starting to stop lending for fossil fuel projects because they don't make economic sense anymore. And I think, and there's a huge divestment campaign, led by climate change activists to educate people about how risky those climate investments are, because those companies will start losing value and probably very rapidly, unless they can make some kind of transition to other forms of energy production. So yeah, that's a really tough problem. And again, that is what a lot of the climate politics is about. Sort of the underlying issue is what's going to happen to the trillions of dollars of investment in the fossil fuel industries. And Obama's house off Cape Cod, I don't know anything about that, so I can't comment on that.
Well, I just want to say about that $100. I mean, we need different people in Columbus. This state is like a microcosm of the country. It's a mess. There's more Democrats in Ohio than Republicans, and yet all these statewide offices and the vast majority of the state house super Republican majorities in both houses. I cannot tell you how anti-wind power and solar power these people are. They just have it in for wind power. It's beyond imagination, really. And it's because of the incredible power of the utilities and their 100 lobbyists, First Energy alone, like I said, 100 lobbyists. And you talk about the national politics, lobbyists swarming Washington, lobbyists are swarming Columbus as well. And so we need to be in much closer touch with our representatives, both Democrats as well as Republicans. There's a well-known local Democrat who's interested in running for mayor of Cleveland who's bought and sold by First Energy. I just speak the truth. Well, again, a lot of good stuff it's like 1,000 flowers are starting to bloom. I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs get it, and there's all kinds of potential startups, and there's people in other states, in other areas of the country that are, a lot of this stuff is booming. Look at California. But, again, we are where we are, and we can, we need to take the next step, and whatever that step is. But awareness is huge. It's just huge, and you can look at the Trump presidency. Low information voters. People don't know stuff. I mean, I think, sort of the group of well-intended middle-class people who keep up with things have no idea how little information a huge swath of the electorate has, a huge swath of the electorate. And so it's all about educating people and raising awareness. I can't stress that enough. I don't know how to do that, but I think the awareness on the part of people of goodwill who do keep up is critical. The awareness of how so many other people don't. Like, where I used to go get my hair cut. I told my, this was years ago, I told my the cosmetologist that I wanted a haircut like Elizabeth Warren. She goes, "Who's that?" And I knew she knew who it was, but she refused to ever talk politics, ever. She didn't want a word. And there's a whole lot of people like that. So I think, again, understanding that about a huge chunk of the population helps those of us who are engaged to better deal with that situation. It's all about awareness and education.
I have another perspective on that $100 for your license plate that I heard on Sound of Ideas when they were talking about it, I think a couple weeks ago. So you're not buying as much gas. You're not contributing the taxes on that gas that keep the roads from falling apart. And that's the reason that they charge so much for the cars that get such great mileage. Just putting that out there. So a lot of times we hear the Green New Deal is pie in the sky. People want to take our hamburgers away. People want to eliminate airline travel. So I just wondered if you had some comments about those things.
It's all true that we're.
No more hamburgers.
Yeah, the Green New Deal resolution in Congress says nothing about any of that. However, it is true that the idea is to make fossil fuels less competitive with cleaner sources of energy. So we make a transition. And there are sectors of the economy that emit lots of greenhouse gases, and we need to do less of that and more of other things. It's part of this transition. So with your hamburgers, in terms of your personal diet, eating beef is one of the worst things you can do if you care about your personal carbon emissions. So we all should be eating, less beef, less meat in general, eat a more vegetarian diet. You'll save money and you'll be healthier if you do that. So there's a lot of good reasons to make these transitions. The Nazis are not going to come for your hamburgers, but they might cost more. There might be more regulations on parts of the agricultural industry that produce livestock to control methane emissions and other things. And it might, and the energy inputs for certain kinds of agriculture will cost more if they're based on fossil fuels. So the economy will recalibrate and people will shift towards other things. It'll just make sense to do that. So I guess that's part of the hope. Air travel, again, is if you care about your personal carbon emissions, it's a lot of emissions in a short time, and you should probably try to reduce your air miles wherever you can, and reduce your luxury emissions of just going on vacations for the fun of it and flying. It's a responsible thing to do. The airline industry is going to have to become more efficient. Maybe try to change the kinds of fuels that they use. Air travel might become more expensive as traditional, airline fuel becomes more expensive. So again, those things will gradually happen, and in 20 years, we all might find that we're flying less. And it'll be helped, our choices will be helped if our government starts investing in cleaner alternatives. If we had a high-speed rail network in this country, fewer of us would be tempted to fly places. We'd have a better, safer, lower-cost alternative that would be healthier for everybody. So a lot of these things are choices that I don't like to blame the victim. I think we're more victims in all this. We have a society that's set up to force us to use lots of fossil fuels just to survive. We've got to drive, we've got to turn on the lights, we've got to do all these things. We can design our society in different ways, and our government can support that. So we don't have to use as much energy in our daily lives. In the introduction, it mentioned that I used to work at the Natural History Museum, and a few years ago, we built the first passive house in Ohio as an exhibit. It's now on Wade Park Avenue if you want to go see it. But that house, it's a net zero house. It's got incredible insulation, incredible windows and doors. So it's kind of built like a thermos. And it just doesn't take much energy to operate that house. So we could all have houses like that. They don't cost that much more than a regular house. And if we had them, we would just normally use less energy as part of our daily lives. We wouldn't have to think about it. We wouldn't have to make moral choices all the time. It would just be the way things are. And that's the way things should be.
I just want to speak personally because as a result of my I guess my awareness of the fact, those 100,000 1,300 or 13, some enormous number of scientists declared that we're in a climate emergency back in, I guess, no, not too long ago. And so I have a son and grandchildren in Vermont and a son and a grandchild in Colorado. So, and I go and visit them. So this Christmas, when I went to Vermont, I decided I wasn't going to drive. I took the train. It's the first time I ever even thought of taking the train. It was a little bit, wouldn't even say it was more inconvenient. It was great. I loved it. And you get on a train and it's like 10,000 times better than a plane as a quality travel experience. You got room, you can get up and move around, you'll get a whiskey at the bar, and you make friends, you talk to people. You're crammed into a plane, but, very few people are talking to each other. But in a train where there's much more room, there's a lot of crosstalk interaction, and it was just an unbelievably good experience. So then, when I flew to Colorado just last weekend, I took the train to the airport. Now look at all those car parks around that airport. There are probably 20,000 cars at all times parked around that airport. We've got a perfectly good train that goes. All of the trains go through Tower City. You could have somebody drop you off at Tower City and take the train to the airport if you have to fly. I mean, it's about our consciousness of, what impact we have on the environment, and that I don't want to sort of support any kind of self-righteousness, but in order to make a change, we have to make a change in our own lives too. And I think once we do that, we can be more. We can fight for the big changes. Obviously, everybody changing their lifestyle isn't going to do it. We got to still deal with the fossil fuel industry. We still have to deal with, all kinds of big picture entities. But, it is about making that. I love the way David talks about it, because, people change with conditions. And, our conditions are changing, so we need to be changing too, and that comes, that starts with a sort of a consciousness. So I think it's really important that we individually think about these things and what we're doing. And it's not so bad. The changes aren't so bad so far.
Obviously, what you're addressing is the ideal. Now, I want to know what David thinks of the space program, because my husband was a rocket scientist for NASA. Okay, how you feel, because they are using fuel. Okay, the other thing, the space program, should we eliminate it? Okay, the other thing is, I think what you speak of is the ideal. Also, if you take not eating hamburger and other less expensive meats away from people who don't earn maybe what you earn or what my husband earned, they're not going to eat as well. I mean, this is a big transition we're speaking of. Also, you speak of fossil fuel. There's some really common sense, reasonable things to do. We have to go back to the past. We had one car for 6 people. I had 4 children. We did the drop-off thing, and we planned our trips. So we didn't have 2 cars in our family most of the time. And that could happen now, but do you ever look at, I live in Westlake, and you look in the driveways. In Cleveland, we had 1, maybe 2 cars, and I moved from Cleveland to Westlake about 20 years ago. I am not kidding you, there's 3, 4, and 5 cars in the driveways. Why? So we could do things in a reasonable way, but we all have to work together. And as far as Joe Biden is concerned, whether you vote for him or not, he just needs a shove. I mean, he's a good man, and I think he's open to change, but he needs to be educated like every one of us.
I think you raise a good point about how our communities are designed so that it's difficult for us to live a low carbon, low energy lifestyle. And one of the encouraging kind of real estate trends in recent years has been how many people, especially young millennials who might have grown up in the suburbs, are moving into urban cores, into walkable neighborhoods, and they like it. They want to be able to, so a lot of them don't want to have to own a car. Cars are really expensive, and they've all got school loans to pay off, and it's too much. So they'd rather live in a walkable neighborhood where they can walk to the coffee shop and walk to interesting places, maybe walk to their job, all in a convenient, nice urban, environment. And I live at Shaker Square, and my wife and I moved there intentionally because we wanted a more walkable neighborhood. I can walk to the grocery store, the drugstore, the movie theater, lots of restaurants, and get on the Rapid. If I do fly, which even I do occasionally, I just hop on the Rapid and we're right at the airport. So I think a lot of people would like to live a car-free lifestyle, but our cities are not designed to permit that in most cases. So again, that's part of rebuilding our society so that we can all use less energy without, again, making tough moral decisions all the time, but just because that's just the way things are. If you go to European cities, a lot of them are designed that way. So everyone can bike, everyone can walk, and they're a lot healthier than Americans are. So again, there's a lot of reasons to do these things, not just to save energy.
There's a great video. I don't know how you would get to it, but I remember catching it. It was attached to somebody's email to me about the Netherlands and how they had this big superhighway in, I guess it was Amsterdam. I'm not sure what city in the Netherlands it was, but they had a superhighway and there were lots of traffic deaths. And they intentionally, again, the government very involved, intentionally moved over a period of, I think 20 years to a totally bike culture, and it shows the footage of the streets are just crammed with bicycles, and unlike here we're used to seeing people with helmets and gear and all the right stuff to. Those are the cyclists in our culture, but nobody had a helmet, and apparently the accidents are very low, but the streets were just crammed with bicycles, in a major European city. And people go to work, people went, every place they went on a bike. And it was an intentional change. It was very intentional, and it was supported by the population and the government. And they made it, and it's just remarkable. I wish I could give you the link to this video, but it just blew my mind when I saw it. It was amazing.
Kind of spoke to my question about agriculture and diet and the effect that has on climate change as well. And I don't think it's really addressed in the Green New Deal, but to Harriet, I imagine that's pretty unionized. I mean, it's a huge industry. Do you know what the union picture is on that?
On agriculture?
Agriculture, food industry workers in general, dairy, meat.
Yeah. I mean, it is huge. It's complete. I mean, the agricultural industry is virtually completely unorganized, so I don't deal with them at all, and I don't know very much about the agricultural industry. But you can do sustainable agriculture, and I think you can do it on a large scale, and we need to do it because the fertilizers, are not only going into the water system and wreaking terrible havoc on that, but they're, they're having a huge impact on biodiversity. The bees are dying, and so that's another area where we have to make a change. I mean, if all the bees die, guess what? We die. And so I mean, and there are a lot of these species that are critically important to human existence are on a path to extinction. So at some point in time, things are going to have to change, and better they change gradually and incrementally than radically and dramatically. As we face mass extinctions of species. So that would be my, but I don't know anything about the agricultural industry. Only that, most farmers are tenants. They're not owning, the family farm is disappearing rapidly. It's mostly agribusiness, and so we have to deal with Archer Daniels Midland and all these other, huge mega corporations when we think about farming.
And I think in a couple of months, one of the topics of this series is going to be agriculture and food, right?
Yes, it is. And also, just as a side note, on March 14th, Saturday, March 14th in the evening, we're going to have a film screening of Right to Harm, which talks about the harmful industrial food, livestock raising and all that. So we're going to have that here if you want to see, come on back for that.
But our agricultural system is an industrial system that's based on using fossil fuels for all kinds of inputs. And so that's another area where a transition needs to take place.
You know what? I just want to add one thing, because my son is a forester, and when he was in school, he kept talking about the Green Revolution being really a bad thing. And apparently, in this arena, there was the move from traditional family crops to monoculture. Where again a big outfit buys up everybody's land, and then they convert from growing, a vegetable garden to soybeans or a monocrop, and they called that the Green Revolution, which sounds good, but it was hideously awful, and it took place, from the middle of the 20th century all the way through the end, and it was terrible, and it's been terrible for the whole planet, and it's something that's got to go. We can't. It's not sustainable. They called it the Green Revolution, ironically.
I'd like to make one comment. It was brought up, David, by you that a lot of people think that the solution is the carbon tax. But in our political situation and what you're both saying about the power of the industry, if a carbon tax is enacted, it's going to be passed on to the consumer. And what's going to happen is those people who can afford the increased price are going to take it, they're still going to live the same way, but you're going to have a much more spread between the haves and the have-nots, because you're going to have the have-nots that can no longer afford those things. And I don't think people who support the carbon tax as a solution are even considering the discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots.
No, I think many of them actually are. A lot of the proposals are like a fee and dividend idea, where the added tax would be rebated back to people according to some formula, and maybe more to lower income people, so that they would come out even, but it would still, the price signals for higher energy costs would still make people switch to cleaner forms of energy. There was a group, the Citizens Climate Lobby, has a table out in the lobby, and they have a lot of information about some of these ideas. That's what they're pushing in Congress, is a sort of a fee and dividend idea. So there, in some cases, it is considered so people are kind of held neutral in that.
And that's, I think, why it's so wonderful that the Green New Deal concerns itself so heavily with justice and a just transition. And so it isn't enough to clean up the environment and reduce fossil fuel emissions. We have to redistribute income and wealth, and that's critical, so that we don't have haves and have-nots. After all, we've got this incredible have and have-not situation because of our current economic system and all the, all the power seizure by all these multinational companies, the fossil fuel industry, the health insurance industry, and you name it. And that's what's caused this horrific acceleration of accumulation of wealth in the top 1% and 1/10% and all that other stuff. So, the Green New Deal is about the opposite of that. So, that's, I think, an important thing to keep in mind.
Have another question?
What? No, I'm not. No. She's telling me to stand up. I don't want to. So I just have a comment back to the agriculture aspect. I really like statistics. So from a statistics standpoint, making 1 pound of beef is the approximate equivalent to 1,800 gallons of water because of the process that it goes through. 1 pound of beef is also about the equivalent of driving 200 miles. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a huge societal change, but for individuals who rely on beef for their dietary measurements and whatnot, should consider maybe reducing the amount that they consume or switching to white meats, which have a less dramatic impact on the environmental problems that are currently occurring. My family struggled a lot with trying to find more sustainable measures. My father used to really, really like consuming beef. We thought about, maybe switching it over to pork, which is a little bit more sustainable. And then as far as trying to find something to dietarily shift over to, because of the problem with individuals who are used to consuming large amounts of red meat and then won't eat as well if they stop doing that, I think that comes back to education, looking for CSAs within the community, locally sourced foods, and really kind of looking into how much meat a human being needs, because the American culture tends to advertise that people need to eat a lot of meat, when in reality, they really don't. They can get a lot of their protein and whatnot from vegetables and grains. And then as far as that goes, just reducing it. So as a kind of statistic measure to point out it from an everyday standpoint, life-wise, an environmentalist who's very environmentally conscious and really works on making their house water not leak, taps are all turned off, turning off the hose, turning off the lights, biking to work and whatnot, the equivalent of water that would save, the equivalent of methane that would save, all goes away for about 3 months as soon as 1 pound of beef is consumed. So I think from an agricultural standpoint, there does need to be a major shift, but as you're also saying, there's a lot going into this problem, so.
Yeah, those are all great points. And there are a lot of really good beef alternatives, meat alternatives coming on the market now. Has anyone been to Burger King to try that? Is it the Beyond Beef Whopper? Impossible Burger. Yeah, they're good. I tried one of those alternative Whoppers. They're good.
And now I forget what I was going to say. Shoot, I hate when that happens. David mentioned that Marcia Fudge has co-signed the Green New Deal, which is a resolution before the House, and there's a resolution before the Senate. And I believe she's the only Ohio legislator who has co-signed. So please consider calling your senator and your representative in Washington and telling them that you support the Green New Deal and you want them to become co-sponsors.
Yeah, that's a really important point. That's one thing we can all do right away, is to start pressuring our local congressional representatives, or even the state representatives, all of our elected officials.
Yeah, I just want to go a little bit back to the hamburger, because you raised the question about people not being able to afford, and I think beef really isn't the most affordable source of protein at all. You got eggs, you got dairy, you got lots of things. And so again, it's about awareness and education. There's so much need for that. I think a lot of people don't know these things, and beef is not exactly good for your heart either. So there's just a ton of awareness and education that needs to take place.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Dorothy was saying. It was great discussion tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Really, we're lucky to have your expertise and thoughtfulness. But, I had a question, kind of following up on something that you said, Harriet, about people needing to get up off their couches and get in the streets. I think you said so. I don't know. I was wondering if what you meant by that was the kind of climate protests that were Greta started and Cuban is kind of signed on to that as a tactic too, it seems like. So I just wondered if you think that that's something that people should be doing.
I do. They change things, and it's not. There's getting into the streets and going to a demonstration does a lot of things. Number one, statistically, they know that for every person who shows up, there's 10 or 12 or 17 or some. I'm not sure what the additive is, but people who would be, who agree with that and who would have gone. So the idea, of course, is to get media attention to that, so that it is an educational piece for the people who aren't there. But it also is a great boon to the people who go. It is a terrific morale booster. If you attend a demonstration, you feel so much better about your cause. You can sit home and feel isolated and lonely and, everything's going to hell in a handbasket and woe is me. You go to a demonstration and you get a completely different take on things. And that's really important for the people who care enough to go to a demonstration. They're movers and shakers, they're activists. The activists need to feel good. They need to feel a sense of hope and optimism that change can take place and that they can affect change. And so it's critically important that people who are committed to something act on that and act in concert with other people. That's really, really, really important. And the other thing is the media piece. The media is so ignorant. I mean, we have to, if enough people show up, theoretically, there'll be more media coverage, and that is a critically important piece because we're not getting the education from the news media at all, and we're not getting it in schools anywhere near enough, and we're not getting it from the politicians. And so, except for Fox News, which is doing a great job of educating its audience about its views, but it's very important that people go to protests and that enough people go so that it does get the coverage that it needs, and it changes things. It changes the people at home, and it changes the people who go.
Just another comment on the value of kind of standing up publicly about things. There's a social scientist at Harvard, I forget her name, but she did a study of social movements throughout history and the ones that have actually been successful in making big changes. And she found that it only took about 3.5% of the population of a country to be actively engaged in a movement to put it over the top and to make it successful. So in a large country like ours, 3.5% is many millions of people, but it's still, a small percentage. But you have to have people actually standing up visibly. Maybe it's a demonstration, but it's affecting the political process in some visible way to make big changes.
So if anybody is looking for the opportunity to be at a demonstration, coming right up on Earth Day on April 22nd, there is a climate strike at Public Square. I think it's at noon. Everybody is welcome. It's being sponsored by Sunrise Movement and various others. They're looking to build up a bigger demonstration than climate strikes have attracted so far, and there have been a couple of them this year, actually last year. So we're looking for 4 times the people that were there the last time. So y'all be there, okay?
I just wanted to add to that. Look at the impact that Greta Thunberg, I think that's how you say her name, has had. She started off, and again, there's another lesson there. She started off as one person, then 2, then 3, then half a dozen. And look at the enormous, enormous impact she has had. She's even gotten the right to come up with an evil twin. I mean, she's had incredible impact, more impact than all the, anything up until then to focus on this issue. So the power of ordinary people acting in concert is unbelievable, and we don't feel that because we don't do it enough. Look at, in Singapore and Hong Kong, and, in Egypt, governments have been brought down because people got into the street. And it's really important. Bernie talks about a movement. We can't just elect the right politicians. We really have to have a movement of people that pushes for things that will benefit everybody. And we're so conditioned to not doing that in our culture now, and in the days ahead, think about this. Think about if the occupant of the White House refuses to leave. Are you going to sit on your couch? And if you do, he won't. He'll stay forever. He'll stay till the day he dies. I'm serious. Think about it.
Yes, I have a soft spot for bicycles. So I just want to put a plug in for bicycles. I go to Berlin, Germany. I spend 3 weeks every couple of years. But at any rate, in Berlin, Germany, the bicycle is a large part of their transportation system. They have what they call S-Bahn, U-Bahn. Those are subways. But you can take your bicycle on those. You can take the bicycle on the bus. They have racks in front. You just put your bicycle on the front, and there you go. And likewise, subway, you just take it right onto the car. They have a space in the certain car for you and your bike, but at any rate. And then within the city, they have designated bike lanes just all over the city. But and those are truly busy, just solid traffic bikes. And likewise, around Berlin, the farmers don't put their farmhouse out in the field. They put them in small groups, small villages. But from, say, these small towns around Berlin into Berlin, you can go by bicycle. They have asphalt bikeway on each side of the road, one for each direction, and indeed there's people on their bikes. And again, they're very strict. You dare not walk on the bike path. They're very strict. Likewise, you dare not ride your bicycle on the sidewalk. I found that out the hard way. But they're very, very strict. And again, it's another mode of transportation they use, and their bicycles, the Europeans make their bicycles. They're made for use. They're heavy frames, easy to pedal, bike racks. So bikes in Berlin, and I'm sure in other European cities, are an integral part of their transportation system. People use them. 79, I was in China, just in a coastal city. I remember waking up in the morning, 8 o'clock, and I heard this sound I had never heard before. And when I went out outside the hotel, the street, the sound was just solid bicycles on the streets. Very few cars, with just this bikes going probably to work or someplace. So certain parts of the world, bicycles are an integral part of their transportation system, and they build that infrastructure so this can happen. So maybe we should start that here in the States.
But if you've had the luxury of being in some of these foreign cities and seeing how people can live, you come back to America and you look at the American landscape and transportation system, and you think, this is insane. It's completely unsustainable. It's unhealthy. It's just, and ugly in many ways. So,
right, we've got,
we can make our cities much different than they are. We just got to imagine it.
We've run over. We're going to
We have a start. We've got bike racks on buses. So I think we've made some progress. We just need to keep going and change consciousness.
All right, just a real quick comment, and then we're going to have to finish up.
Yeah, I just want to invite everybody. There's a national organization with a local chapter here in Cleveland, Move to Amend. Is everybody familiar with that? I mean, underlying everything we're talking about tonight is money in politics and how the politicians are bought off and they're just listening to their donors. They're not listening to the voters. You know, the political campaigns should be publicly financed. So Move to Amend is the organization that's working on the